Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Surya Deva. I'm a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And thank you for joining us either virtually or in person in Suva. It's my great pleasure to moderate this session, and the focus of the session is on implementing UN guiding principles on business and human rights, pathways for the Pacific. So I think it is synchronized as well, pathways for the Pacific, right? So we have a very distinguished panel of 5 experts, and because the forum is hybrid, this session speakers are also joining us both virtually as well as in person. So let me introduce all the 5 panelists in one go, and then I'm going to invite them one by one to offer their reflections. So we have Mr. Livio Sarandrea. He is the Chief Advisor and Manager of the Business and Human Rights in Asia for the Undp. Then we have Ms. Vanessa Zimmerman. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Pillar 2 and a board member of Global Compact Network Australia. Thirdly, we have Dr. Natasha Khan, and she works for the University of the South Pacific, and she is a coordinator of the diploma program on leadership, governance, and human rights. Then we have Mr. Ashwin Raz, who is a director of Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission in Fiji. Last but not least, we have Ms. Christina Sakato. She is a policy officer in the Conservation and Environmental Protection Authority of the Papua New Guinea. I think we are having some issues with Christina, but hopefully she will be able to join us. We were able to hear her, but she could not listen to us. But let us say if we can figure that out in the meantime. So before we start the discussion, let me say a couple of points about the main objective of this session. As you will notice from the title of the session, the key objective of this session is to find pathways for the Pacific in implementing UN guiding principles. And we want to find out what other countries in Asia have done so far and what lessons the Pacific governments can find. And I'm using Pacific in a broad sense to also potentially cover New Zealand and Australia, though they are part of Western Europe and other countries as part of the formal UN system of different regions, but they are physically quite close to this part of the world. So hopefully that is acceptable for the purpose of this session at least. We would also like to explore that how a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights or other pathways could help these states in the Pacific to implement better the Sustainable Development Goals. We still have 10 more years to go, and I think there are serious challenges that we are facing in achieving those Sustainable Development Goals. And also the question is about the governance issues that we have in the Pacific and how could this National Action Plan overcome those governance challenges. So I think with these brief context, I would like to now invite the format of this session is going to be kind of a dialogue. So I will have certain questions to each of the panelists. I understand that Natasha would like to use a PowerPoint, but other panelists will not be using any PowerPoints. So I would like to start, Livio, with you first. Livio, you have been working in this space of business and human rights for a number of years. And as you know, the UN guiding principles were adopted 9 years back. So it's a 9-year journey. So if you can share with us what progress have we made in Asia, in different countries so far? What are the main barriers you see? And how can we overcome those barriers? Livio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Surya. Thank you for having me, and greetings to everyone in the Pacific. You mentioned looking back at the last 9 years. My first observation will be that if we look at Asia, at least from a point of view of government action, we are actually looking at the last 5 years, which is, from my observation, where really traction started in terms of business and human rights. Progress, the most visible to date, from my observations again in the last 5 years, is in terms of awareness, which is obviously step one of bringing a business and human rights discourse in every region. So a lot has progressed in Asia in terms of awareness. And in fact, I have to say the game changer when it comes to awareness raising in Asia was a regional forum, one of the game changers. So again, congratulations one more for having the Pacific Forum, because I think that will take you a long way in terms of awareness. So again, awareness is step one, it's very important. Still in 2015, when we started, the very associations of world business and human rights were puzzling many people. If we don't manage to explain to all the stakeholders what we talk about when we talk about business and human rights, we can't start a discourse. Again, in Asia, or at least in some parts of Asia, we have progressed greatly in that regard. Proof is the fact that the CSR discourse, CSR narrative has been almost completely replaced now by the business and human rights one. Number of countries that work on human rights has grown year by year. We started with Thailand kind of timidly in 2016, and Indonesia followed, Malaysia, blocks of countries followed. We now have 12 countries in Asia that have a current discourse on business and human rights. Some, of course, have progressed more than others. Second point, in at least 6 of these 12 countries, the awareness raising moved forward and triggered policy commitments in the form of national action plans on business and human rights. Again, Thailand was the first that was adopted last year, Japan very recently, but we have Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Mongolia, and a few others preparing their national action plans on business and human rights. So again, 6 countries already on step 2, which is policy commitment and policy making. Third aspect that I want to signal, peer learning and cooperation between countries made a big difference. Peer learning at the bilateral level and again at the regional level. Indeed, Indonesia followed and learned a lot from Thailand, Malaysia followed Indonesia, South Asia followed Southeast Asia. So the peer learning has been something which has really characterized the growth of the business and human rights discourse in Asia. I'm very pleased to see that the conversation between countries went to how to do it to what to do. And Thailand and Japan are actually meeting very soon on their implementation of their respective NAPs. Another thing that worked in Asia, and let me be very practical in this sense, the discourse moved forward also because there were some resources invested in it. Donors believed in business and human rights and invested some resources. I should say, whenever there is a will and some resources, there is a way. Otherwise, we can't have scale. So I would definitely encourage those donors that are listening to keep supporting the initiative of the OHCHR in this region, because it is important to put some resources into it. Resources, of course, can come from the very countries themselves, and we have examples of Thailand, Indonesia, and India putting their own resources into business and human rights. Let me remain at the regional level to present the current challenge. What concerns me the most at this stage when it comes to the region is the different speed of progress within the continent. So there are some countries, and I mentioned already some names, where the discourse is progressing quite rapidly, but there are some others where we're still at ground zero in terms of awareness. And I'm a little concerned about this, because if we go at different speeds, we run the risk of creating a playing field which is not leveled. We run the risk of actually having pockets of impunity, and being the business and human rights discourse so linked globally and regionally, I fear that if we don't manage to move all the region together, those that have progressed will actually pose, fearing to give too much advantage somehow to those who still offer pockets of impunity, so to speak. Another challenge, awareness and progress is still too much only at capital level. There is a need now in Asia to penetrate more to the local level. And again, certain countries have already started to do so. Thailand and Indonesia are 2 good examples of that. Last challenge, and I'm concluding, more awareness in Asia led also to more activism, which is good. But unfortunately, that has also translated into increased attacks to human rights defenders. A lot of cases of strategic litigations against public participation and actual killings and disappearances. So my recommendation to those coming up with business human rights policies in the Pacific is to pair from the outset those policies with robust mechanism of accountability and whistleblower protection. I'll stop here, Surya, and of course, very happy to come back and expand on any of these points if you wish, or the audience wishes. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Livio, for providing this excellent summary of where Asia is generally and what are the challenges and what are the ways to overcome some of these challenges. That should be very useful as a starting point. And we will try to come back to some of these points as part of the conversation. I would like to mention that there are people in physical room in Suva, and I understand there are also people in Solomon listening to this web. So hopefully you will be able to participate. So use your microphone. You can use your mic. Robert should be in the room. So I will give you the opportunities to ask questions to the panelists. And if you have any views you would like to share. And of course, we have the two panelists, Ashwin and Natasha, very much present in the room. Ashwin, I can see you, in fact. So that's great. Let me now move on to this next panelist, and I'll come back to Livio. But before we do that, let me have the first round of interaction with all the panelists. So Vanessa, you have worked with Professor John Ruggie in the drafting process, UN guiding principles, and you have tremendous experience of business and human rights, both in Australia and at a global landscape. The question that I have for you is that the Australian government made an initial commitment to develop a national action plan. What happened to that? Why the progress has not been made in the last few years on this? What are the reasons for this? And what could be done to push the government in Australia a little bit more to take the leadership in the region? So if you can share insights about this. You have the floor, Vanessa.
Thanks, Surya. You always ask me the easy questions, so but it's always good. Thank you so much for having me as well. I wish I was in one of the Pacific Islands rather than where I am, but it's very nice to be here. It's a really good question. So in 2017, the Australian government set up a multi-stakeholder advisory group on business and human rights, which was made up of business associations, of civil society groups. There was a union representative, I believe, and representatives from the government as well. And the idea was to really provide recommendations to the Australian government on whether there should be a national action plan on business and human rights, especially because at the time, that was when we were seeing quite a few of the European countries look at this. We were starting to see movement in Asia as well. And so it was thought that this was a good time to start talking about this in Australia. Now, this group of experts, and I was very lucky to be a part of this group, actually did make a recommendation to the Australian government around the benefits of a national action plan. And just forgive me for a second, I'm going to read out what was said in the paper, because I think it was actually quite strong and shows why this group thought there was value in a national action plan. So they said the MSAG, which is what they were called, sees value in the Australian government delivering a coordinated policy statement in the form of a national action plan, which sets out the concrete steps it will take to implement the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, including its expectations of business and other stakeholders regarding their conduct in Australia and abroad, and what support it will provide in helping them meet those expectations. So the idea from this group was to say it would be beneficial to have a plan that really just helps business, but also helps other stakeholders to understand what the expectations are of those parties and what role the government would play, particularly what the role government might play in supporting business, but also the different roles that different departments might play in the government to make sure that there is policy coherence. The government, and I should stress that I can't speak on behalf of the Australian government, so I'm just giving you my reflections from the time. At the time, the government said they would not proceed with a national action plan at that stage. I think they were the words they used. And really, I think there were a couple of reasons why it didn't go ahead at that time and why we still don't have a national action plan here in Australia. I think one point is around awareness, to what Livio was saying. I think at that point in time, even though it was still quite a few years after the UN Guiding Principles were endorsed, there was still a lack of awareness. There was quite a lot of awareness between, I guess, the kind of business and human rights community. But in terms of some of the other stakeholders that might need to understand what that plan was and what it was going to do and why it wasn't too scary, I think there wasn't perhaps the awareness from that other group of broader stakeholders. And that's a lesson to us as kind of advocates for these types of plans. In particular, some of the business associations were not supportive. So I think the bigger businesses were very much on board, but some of the associations that represent smaller and medium-sized businesses did not understand, I think, what this plan was trying to do, and felt that it might place too many extra obligations onto smaller and medium-sized businesses that they didn't understand. And so I think that was, again, a lesson to us, that you can't assume that everybody is in your tent and that you've got everybody there ready to move forward. The Australian government at that time also took a seat on the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, and I think had other priorities. And movement was also already happening on the Modern Slavery Act in Australia, which I'll talk about in a second. And so I think people were kind of thinking, well, do we really need a plan and a big high-level policy document if we're already moving forward on a few different issues? And so I think there was that sense that sometimes in Australia, we don't always like to kind of have plans and frameworks. We prefer to just sometimes do. But you know, I think there wasn't that understanding of how valuable that framework could be, as something sitting on top of that. Since then, there have been some, every once in a while we'll talk about whether we should push for a national action plan. Again, I'm still very supportive of one. I think because of my background with the UN Guiding Principles and watching the good work that Livio has done in the Asia region, and with working with governments there, I think it's very beneficial. But actually, some of my colleagues in the business and human rights community, even from civil society, because I tend to work more with business, have said, you know what, we probably don't need this right now. Let's just keep working on some of these more specific areas. So I think we need to get some more consensus again within the Australian business and human rights community, that this is something that people want to push for and that we want to do. A couple of the other developments that have happened in the meantime have been the Modern Slavery Act, which I mentioned before. So that is a new piece of legislation that many of you might be aware of, that requires large Australian companies to report every year on how they're basically identifying, assessing and addressing any modern slavery risks in their own operations or their supply chains. It's not a broader human rights piece of legislation, but it is something that has meant, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure, it has meant that companies have been looking more at their human rights responses. We've had Australia being deeply involved in the Bali process around human trafficking and slavery, and trying to work, I think, region with governments and business to propel business respect for human rights, again, in that very specific area of modern slavery and human trafficking. We've seen the refresh of the Australian National Contact Point under the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. For those of you that don't know, it's basically a non-judicial grievance mechanism that allows complaints to be made against Australian companies for breaches of those guidelines overseas or at home. And those guidelines, the human rights chapter essentially mirrors the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And so the Australian that grievance mechanism sits within the Australian government, and the Australian government has recently refreshed that to take away some of the barriers to accessing that mechanism. And in fact, there is already now a couple of complaints before the Australian National Contact Point, including relating to one relating to the Pacific region in terms of Bougainville. So we've seen quite a few, I guess, steps being taken. Also, our National Human Rights Institution, the Australian Human Rights Commission, has put out quite a bit of awareness raising around business and human rights. So I think we are moving forward here. I think there are still some concerns, though, that without a national action plan on business and human rights, we might get very stuck into these very specific thematic issues like modern slavery or others, and not have a broader viewpoint. And then again, that policy coherence within the Australian government to make sure that the Department of Foreign Affairs is speaking to the Treasury Department and speaking to perhaps, other departments that work with various industries. So I think it would still be helpful, but I think we need to get, more consensus across the community, and particularly making sure that the different business groups understand what this is. Unfortunately, still in Australia, even the phrase human rights still is not that well understood. A little bit more now after the pandemic, but it's something we need to work on. Thanks,
Thank
Surya.
you very much. Thanks, Vanessa, for sharing these very candid and useful insights for many participants. I'm sure they would learn. And I think Australia is unique in many ways. So it seems that Australia is doing some action without a plan. Though we have countries which have a plan, but perhaps they're not taking action. So we have different situations in the world. And I think the actions that you highlighted is in the Modern Slavery Act, of course, but you also underlined the issue of national contact point, how that has been strengthened, the work done by the Australian Human Rights Commission, and also the point you made about, I think you're talking about Bali process. Yeah, so I think these are important actions. But I very much hope that going forward, Australia does not feel scared anymore because we have Thailand and Japan in Asia adopting a national action plan. And as Livio mentioned, several other countries are moving in this particular direction. And I think not very far from Australia, New Zealand accepted a recommendation as part of UPR to develop a national action plan. And the Commissioner Sumoyo from New Zealand Human Rights Commission was saying yesterday that the Commission is pushing the government there to adopt the National Action Plan. So let's see where we go. So let us now come to Fiji. So Ashwin, the question that I have for you is that you have been part of this Human Rights Commission and Anti-Discrimination Commission in Fiji. So what are the main challenges that you see in the local context of Fiji in terms of businesses respecting human rights? If you can share some insights on that. And I think we can link it back with what both Livio and Vanessa highlighted in terms of awareness. So what is the level of current awareness, and what role do you see for the Commission in raising that awareness further so the local businesses in Fiji are respecting human rights? So you have the floor, Ashwin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Surya, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm going to dive straight into the question, Surya, in the interest of time, except to make this very, very prefatory remark that, more than ever, in the context of COVID-19, the existential threat around climate change, and other, transboundary challenges in the form of human trafficking and all of that, there's a pressing need to harmonize economies, ecologies, and fundamental respect for human rights and freedoms and inherent human dignity. And we say so precisely because we are working in a context where the massive job losses, reduced hours, salary cuts, and environmental catastrophe, displacement of communities, decimation of cultural ways of living and being. There's the issue of cruel, degrading, and inhuman treatment. There's the exploitation of vulnerable groups such as women and children in the context of work. The suspension of the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right to development, social and economic rights, and it often underscores the vexed relationship between business and human rights. If you look at our legislation, of course, the primary responsibility in terms of the protection, promotion, and preservation of human rights lies with the state, but we all know that the state is but a partial and incipient fragment in this entire kaleidoscope. And businesses have an important role to play in preventing human rights violations, but also creating the conditions of possibility so that victims of human rights violations can have access to remedy. And there's of course a growing recognition across the board that human rights violations actually bad for business, precisely because of reputational risks and damages. So there's that whole realpolitik that shapes how people look at these things. Of course, we have to work in the context that the guiding principles are not binding. So how does one work in that kind of context, salutary as the guiding principles are? And in that sense, when we look at this issue of business and human rights and the kind of challenges that the National Human Rights Commission faces, Surya, very specifically, if you look at, say, the guiding principles around 16 on policy commitment, which talks about embedding, a sense of responsibility in businesses for respect for human rights and all of that. And creating a policy statement, for instance, which says that this policy is approved at the most senior level of business enterprise, is actually informed by relevant internal, external expertise, stipulates the enterprise's human rights expectations of the personnel, business partners, and other parties directly linked to its operations. And basically, the ultimate goal is that, this kind of policy commitment shows that businesses are responsible, they are upholding principles of non-discrimination, and they have policies and internal mechanisms in place to deal with human rights violations. Whether it's publicly available and communicated internally and is reflected in operational policies and procedures embedded throughout the business enterprise. And if you look at that and judge our conduct against that, I can say that a number of times the kind of complaints the National Human Rights Commission has received, employees have often, come forward to us and either sought advice or lodged a complaint where they are not aware of the existence of any such policy statement. So that's the first thing. That addresses human rights risks such as unfair treatment, discrimination based on grounds of one's race, religion, other prohibited grounds of discrimination, including, pregnancy or marital status, sexual orientation. And so the question of human dignity is often not reflected, let alone the existence of a policy statement, a very clear policy statement. Despite the fact that the Fijian constitution has a very, very salutary provision under section 26, subsection 3 on prohibited grounds of discrimination, which upholds principles of non-discrimination. And despite the fact that the Bill of Rights can be applied both vertically and horizontally, which means not just the state, but private actors within the state. We also have ratified the covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights. We have, in place the Employment Relations Act. The Human Rights and Discrimination Commission Act also has very, very specific provisions around unfair discrimination. The National Harassment Policy, the National Gender Policy. Of course, Fiji has more recently ratified the ILO Convention on Violence and Harassment in the Workplace, as well as the Disability Act, the rights of the child, conventions and related ancillary legislation. So clearly there's a need for us to seamlessly map these things to see how, in the context of a guideline which is non-binding, how do you use the existing mechanisms to be able to uphold some of these principles. It's also become very, very, important for us if you look at the guiding principles around 17 in terms of assessing actual and potential human rights impact. To look at something like, the principle around act of God, for instance, and force majeure, and the ways in which, this is a breach of contract in terms of arbitrarily being deprived of jobs, and people exploiting the whole COVID-19 situation, businesses mostly, to say that we've been deleteriously impacted by this, so we got to let go of labor force. So what's the institutional recourse, the remedy, the place of courts, the place of national human rights commissions? And so there's a pressing need to think about the jurisprudence around force majeure. We've dealt with companies that, have not provided maternity leave, and they are trying to sort of, get away from it by saying that, look, we're unable to afford this at this particular time, la da da da. Especially if we look at migrant workers, their precarity is very, very different. And the National Human Rights Commission in 2016 looked at the case of Filipino workers whose passports had been confiscated here. Just last week, we dealt with foreign nationals from another country, and we just managed to get their passports. The Commission works very, very closely with the anti-trafficking unit of the Fiji Police Force to ensure that this actually happens. We've also been looking very, very closely in terms of how do we triangulate with fellow national human rights institutions, particularly around the issue of seasonal workers. But we firmly believe that there is existing legislation in place that can be in fact used to give some teeth to the guiding principles and develop a national plan of action that begins to cohere around all of these ancillary pieces of legislation that has provisions in it. That would obviously require a national plan of action, that kind of seamless mapping, that also means looking at things like environmental impact assessment and the ways in which the impact assessment, is transparent, is open. People are able to, give an input. They're able to robustly debate some of these things and be able to be in a cyclical, relationship and feed into the relationship between the state, the private sector, and community. So I'm gonna stop there, Surya, but I've got a lot of other things to say. Except the focus really is about how do we categoristically use the mechanisms we have in place to give teeth to the national guidelines.
Thank you, Ashwin. Very much appreciated both for highlighting the COVID-19 context and the climate change issues. You also mentioned about issues about gender discrimination, gender-based violence. So I think those issues are very pressing issues which should help push the BHR agenda further, perhaps. And I think you also highlighted how we can situate the UN guiding principles in the context of the local legislation in Fiji or other countries for that matter, and how we could develop a national action plan which brings them together. So I think all these are very valid points, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to some of these issues, the issues that you highlighted in terms of anti-trafficking, the treatment of seasonal workers. And I'm glad to see that the Commission is already actively engaged in some of the issues which we will call as BHR issues. So that is good to know, and hopefully the Commission could play a more active role going forward. Also in collaboration with other national human rights institutions in the region. So that takes me to the next speaker. And before we go to another speaker from Fiji, Natasha, I would like to now see if Christina from Papua New Guinea is able to share something about. Christina, can you speak and see if your microphone is working now? Can you hear me, Christina? Christina, can you hear me? I mean, one issue that we see in the Pacific is also the technology and the access to it, right? So we take for granted that access to internet is kind of as easy as access to water, perhaps, but I think things are complicated. We were having some technical issues with Christina, who is in PNG, and of course, there are technical issues in terms of the quality of the internet and access. So I'm just trying to see if we were able to hear her, but she was not able to hear us. So Christina, is the status quo continues, or do we have any change? Her sound is not coming through. That seems to be the case. Okay, so let us pause for now, Christina, and now I would like to then invite the next panelist, and this is Natasha. I see you, Natasha. Thank you very much joining at a very short notice, because we were expecting someone else from the Constitutional Citizens Forum, and thank you very much for stepping in at the very latest stage, and I'm very glad that you are able to join us. So I understand, Natasha, you have a PowerPoint, and Hyun is going to share her screen with that PowerPoint, so hopefully we'll be able to see that. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you what you have to say. I'm in particular interested in terms of local insights. And because you're part of this university in the South Pacific, the perspectives which are relevant not only for Fiji, but also other countries in the Pacific Island countries would be excellent. So with these remarks, I give you the floor, Natasha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Surya. Good morning, everyone. Bula Vinaka. The lecturer and me couldn't help doing the PowerPoint very quickly. And I think from the Pacific learning style that we have, we like to have visual things. So I thought it'd be helpful for the participants as well to see something while we're going through. So I thought quickly we'll rehash what is the National Action Plan, sort of what's the guiding process on that. So the next PowerPoint slide, please. So you'll see there's three phases to it. The first phase 1 to 3, is talking about the development of the initial National Action Plan. Phase 4 and 5 talk about sort of the continuous cycle of implementation, monitoring, and update. So my focus will be on the slide number 3, on the next slide. So we will focus on this part where the most initial, the drafting happens, the sort of the starting process of it. And as we've already listened to the Asia Pacific views in Australia, it's not always an easy process. It's quite a lengthy process. Just as phase 1, initiating the stage itself, can take anything from a year to 2 years to 3 years, and it can fail at that very stage. So it's really important to recognize that this is also the stage where it's more government-led and government-driven. It's also a stage where government would, I think NGOs play a very strong role where they can initiate the process by discussing with the government, approaching the government, seeing the government, sort of encouraging the government to make and seek sort of a formal government commitment to start the process, because it has to be from the state level. And for that to happen, I think it's a very good opportunity here today we have, if nothing else, if many of the NGOs present in this room or this conference, if we are interested, we could probably sit together and get our heads together. How can we actually approach government on this? Because also, once they do the sort of, they formally said, okay, we're going to develop, or we're thinking about developing an action plan, then it talks about sort of all these different variety of people that would be involved. And it's not only government-led, it's government-led, but it will be government agencies, and identifying which government agency will it sit with. So within the government, it can sit with many different agencies, and different governments have taken different approach. For example, Germany, it sits with the Foreign Affairs Department. In different countries, it sits with different departments. So it could, in some country, it could sit with the Labor Department, or Foreign Trade Affairs. Different sections will take, it has to be very country-centric in that, where they have to come up with discussion, who's the best possible agency or government department to take the initial leadership. And how will that then work? And how will they work with liaising with the non-NGOs, including the academia like University of the South Pacific, FNU, and University of Fiji in Fiji itself. With the NGOs, what kind of NGOs, what type of NGOs are you wanting to be in that plan? How participatory it be? Because it can be a very symbolic and tokenism process to tick one of the boxes that we're going to do at an international benchmark and meeting that, or it can be a really participatory driven process where it is a real collaboration between the government and NGOs. And we're talking about then involvement of trade unions, women's organization, all the vulnerable groups, all the groups who gets affected by business and human rights, groups who are affected. So for example, when you're talking about children not being affected by business at some extent because maybe they're not employers or employees, but you'll find some businesses do affect children. And how they affect children, we have to, for example, Vodafone itself is a business, it does affect children, and we've seen so many reports of how the data use affects children, which is really important. We maybe have not thought about that approach, and how we then engage with those approaches, and how do we engage with these different sectors. So to me, I think it is a very interesting process. At the first, maybe something like us, we could start the process, but starting the process also, we also ourselves have to really know what's the guiding principle. And as far as I know, I think it is a very new concept in the Pacific. It's a concept that we are still struggling with at the academia level to get to know, because it is a new concept internationally. So I think first we need to have a deeper understanding of the concept itself. And it has to be a deeper understanding across government and NGOs. So one of the first things, I think it'd be good to have focal points within the government agencies and focal points within CSOs who can be then trained into this, creating this awareness so that they have a very niche, specialized understanding of what is required in the guiding principles. Because if you can have one person attending a meeting, person A from an NGO in one meeting, and then person B or C coming to subsequent meetings, you kind of lose the momentum because they have different understanding they're bringing on the platform. So I think there's the commitment of focal points that would be very important. Training those focal points, creating that awareness, having them committed to it. Sometimes also the focal points, the way they're appointed within the countries or within the government department is very much top-down approach where your CEO or manager would come and tell you that you have to be part of this particular focal point and you're appointed for that. There's really not much passion or engagement to it. And I think we have to do it the other way around where it has to come from the employees themselves or persons within the group themselves. I'm really interested in this particular issue. So you have to stand up within your own organization and say, you know, are you interested to be part of it? And then take the lead in creating awareness within your own organization as well as outside, and as well as getting updated on the information. So then step 3 of phase 1 talks about sort of creating a format for engagement with non-government stakeholders. Again, we've had some examples of how that's happened with the disaster management. We've had some example. We have a current national action plan being developed on gender violence. So we can piggyback on some of the processes that has happened and learn from those experiences, particularly in Fiji. And learning from those experiences, we can also tweak the process for ourselves in this national action plan development. Once it's done, how who's going to take leadership, is going to be rotated, who's going to take a leadership for 1 year or 2 years or so on, which department, and how that's managed. What is the role of NGOs in there? What's the role of government? Are the government going to be just providing the resources, or it works both ways? And then we're talking about publishing, development and publishing a work plan and sort of adequate resources allocated to that from the government budget, which again would be a lengthy process. Phase 2, we're talking about, for me, I think it's also really good integration of government and NGOs in there as well as academia, because this is where we talk about assessment and consultation. And we know that as academics, we're very good at assessments. We're very good at carrying out research. That's an area of specialization that we do have. And this is where we as NGOs and academia can provide a lot of support. This is where evidence comes into process. So understanding of adverse corporate human rights impacts, working with already what's out there, and seeking out new research on assessing impacts, doing rapid assessment. On Monday, we were at the Fiji Women's Rights Movement launch of new publication. They've done a really rapid assessment on COVID-19 impacts, which is a really fascinating research on how that assessment was done in a very quick way, but it was looking at women and children, basically. So how we can then expand it to other groups. Identify gaps in state and business implementation. This again would be something that academia could very well step in and assist in identifying, sort of looking at the platform and looking at what has happened internationally in other platforms in other countries, and looking at how we can, again, whether we can tweak it in the Pacific context and how we can then implement that and find out where the gaps are. And consultation with stakeholders and identify priority areas. We know within the human rights, we know some of the priority areas already, whether this business and human rights is going to piggyback on the priority areas or it's going to be different priorities, because, and that again will only come through sort of a consultation and identification process, because at the moment, one of the major priority areas is gender violence, but also we have huge number of rates of poverty within our country. We have issues about access to basic facilities in certain areas, we have a huge number of squatter people living in the squatter areas, and the sort of the problems that come associated with it. There's issues of abuse of children. There's abuse, child rights is an issue, the issue about LGBTQI and all these other issues that come up. So how does that fit into the the business and human rights practice? This is something that we can see it's being repeated, or it might be something completely new. Because I think with COVID, one of the things we saw in the report from Fiji Women's Rights Movement on Monday was the women they interviewed, majority of them did not have access to FNPF, the government payout through FNPF, because they simply have never had an FNPF account. Or some of them who had FNPF account were not, they thought they had, were having FNPF paid into their account, they've actually not been paid into their account. So because they didn't have FNPF paid into their account, they could not claim this payout from the government itself. So there's so many issues around this thing that is sometimes new to many of us because we've not looked at that particular area as well. So this is something that it might reveal to us there's different areas that we need to focus on. Phase 3, I think, will come after, and to me, I think I can easily see the phase 1 and 2 could take anything up to 4 or 5 years. So that itself could be a long, lengthy process, and we need to be aware, if you're going into it, are we committed enough? Have we thought about resources in that way? Are we there for the long haul? Are we there for the short term to, getting a tick on one of the other international treaties or other declaration or national action plan because everybody is doing it? So I think we need to really have that sit down and thought, are we going to be interested, to be passionate about, to be involved in it? Do we want to learn about it further to do it and continue with that? So I'll leave my thoughts on this here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natasha. In particular, thank you for highlighting these different phases based on the guidance provided by the UN Working Group. That is much appreciated. And I'm sure Livio could share some thoughts based on what is his experience of looking at this guidance in practice. And I will come to Livio in a second. But before we do that, I would like to acknowledge that there are people in the Solomon Island who are able to assemble in a room, 15, 20 people. So that is excellent. So I don't know if there is a mic there and you can ask a question, but feel free to send an email if possible. But I'm sure there are people in Fiji in the hotel room there that they can use their mic to ask question. There's also a question for Ashwin in the chat. So Ashwin, I'm going to read this question and then you will have time to think about the answer, and then I will move on to Livio in the meantime. So the question for you, Ashwin, is that you mentioned existing legislation could be used to protect the UN guiding principles, promote UN guiding principles as well as the Constitution. How many cases has the Commission received on the right to environment under the Constitution? The second question is that when workers' rights are not upheld by the governments and there is ongoing arrest and harassment of trade union workers in Fiji, how can businesses be held accountable? So these are the two questions for you. So you can think about it, how you would like to respond to these two questions. Now I would like to go back to Livio. So Livio, in particular, you have now listened to what Natasha mentioned, and she highlighted the relevance of the consultation with civil society groups, consultation with businesses, trade unions, basically all the stakeholders. That is very crucial. She also highlighted a number of interesting entry points. For instance, she mentioned about the other national action plans that have been developed or are being developed, and how we could insert as a starting point business and human rights in those things, right? So based on your experience in Asia, what suggestions you have for the Pacific Island countries, how they can start and make a small baby steps first and build on them and move further in implementing the UN guiding principles, Livio? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, Surya, and thank you, Natasha, for the excellent exposure of the step-by-step guidance. Indeed, the manual presented by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights has guided all the countries in Asia that have been working and are currently working on the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. But as you said, let me put that theory, that manual, a little bit into practice and share with you some of the lessons that we have learned accompanying these processes of drafting NAPs in Asia. Point one, once a country decides to draft a national action plan, my suggestion is not to rush into it. It takes time to do a good NAP. Yes, you can draft a NAP in a weekend retreat if you want. You can bring in some good professors into a retreat and tick the box and come up with a NAP after that. But that really will not help the process. To draft a good NAP takes, as the manual hints at, around 2 years. In fact, it took Thailand 2.5 years. It took Japan more than 2 years also to draft an NAP. And normally the first year go into the national baseline assessment, and the second year into coming up with various drafts which are validated and so on and so on. Second point, the roadmap to a NAP starts with awareness raising. So I go back to the first point that I made. In fact, is a point that I think could be stressed even more in the manual that the UN Working Group presented, where step 1 is the policy commitment. I really think the roadmap to a NAP starts with awareness raising. You cannot have a good MBA process of having a baseline assessment if you don't explain those stakeholders that you are consulting with, what are you talking about? So again, Thailand is a good example of a country that invested a lot in awareness raising. Every dialogue in preparation of the MBA was paired, in fact, had before that an awareness raising opportunity. Third point, stakeholders consultation is absolutely critical, as many have said. I want to stress that stakeholder consultation needs to happen at central and at the decentralized level. The problems, if you look at them from a capital and if you look at them from a region, can be very different. We're very different in the case of Thailand, again, that identify 4 different priorities in 4 different regions. In Indonesia, we are finding out really that the inputs coming from the decentralized level are quite different from the original vision taken from the capital. So go as much as possible at the decentralized level, look at the different problems in the different parts of the country. Fourth point, there's no need to start from scratch if a government already has some policies in place. And in fact, that's the experience that we have seen in almost all countries where we're working on a NAP. Now, Vietnam comes to mind. For example, Vietnam is drafting a national action plan on responsible business practices. The first step was to identify what are we already doing. So every country engaging in a NAP process will first have to map what's already in there. And they may actually be surprised and find out that there's a lot that they are already doing, a lot that they are also not receiving credit for. So again, no need to start from scratch. Fifth point, the NAP development should be continuously advised by a multi-stakeholder group. So the establishment of a multi-stakeholder steering group, or however one wants to call it, is critical. During the phase of the baseline assessment, during the phase of the drafting, the validation, and obviously very importantly, during the moment of implementing the NAP. And that's the moment in which Japan and Thailand are at this stage. Sixth point, access to peer experiences really can facilitate the use of best practices. I mentioned it earlier, countries here are very connected when it comes to developing their national action plan. And we have learned that countries are very happy and proud to share their experiences. So I really would recommend those engaging in NAPs in the Pacific to reach out to Asia, then reach out among themselves where they will be the first NAPs, and really work together on that. Seventh point, prioritize. A NAP cannot be, we found out, an endless shopping list of issues with everything under the sun. Otherwise, it will not be realistic. So the baseline assessment phase is critical to find out what are the priorities on business and human rights for this specific country. What are the industries that we need to put in focus? What are the specific challenges that we have? And then set within that time frame, normally 4 or 5 years, what are the realistic objectives that can be achieved? As a way of example, Thailand has identified 4 priorities. Indonesia has equally 4 or 5 priorities. Japan has identified 6 priorities for that. 8 point, there's no one size fit all. Literally every country we've been working with on drafting an app chose a slightly different model, chose a different governmental agency to even lead the process of drafting, and really placed the planning process in the context of even the constitutional architecture of a certain country, the geographical distribution of a country. So while the initial critical elements of an app, which are well prescribed by the working group, should remain the same, right? Being based on the UNGPs and so on and so on. But really, there is no one size fits all. And that applies also to the concept of having either a standalone or a chapter on business and human rights within an overall human rights action plan. Even on that, I'm really glad that the working group has been a lot more flexible in their recommendations. That initially, I think the working group was strongly recommending having standalone plans. I think they still are the best option, but I'm glad that there is a flexibility of accepting also chapters on business and human rights within human rights action plans, as far as, of course, they keep all the critical elements of what an app should contain. 9 point, and this is really learning from experience, there will be ups and downs along the road of drafting a national action plan on business and human rights. There will be political changes, there will be pushback, there will be moments of great optimism and moments of pessimism. Put that into consideration, ensure resilience around the process, especially if you're working on it for more than 2 years. Thailand got it very wrong before getting it right. I do think now Thailand is one of the best NAP globally, at least on paper. Before being there, really had a couple of drafts of the NAP, which were not really what everyone was expecting. Last point, the UN family has technical expertise available to support the drafting of national action plans. Do use us, of course, under the overall guidance of the UN working group. Reach out to, obviously, OHCHR, in your case, UNDP, by all means, ILO, UN Women. There are many agencies that are very happy to offer technical support to the process of drafting national action plans on business and human rights. I'll leave it at that. Surya, again, happy to expand or even point to specific country example to illustrate why I came up with these recommendations. Over to you.
Thank you, Livio. Thank you for these 10 points. Plenty of food for thought for the Pacific Island countries, including Australia and New Zealand. Hopefully, they will start this process, learning from what other countries in Asia have done. And perhaps a suggestion or recommendation for UNDP, because UNDP is now taking on the BHR project globally. And I think the Pacific is not, as of now at least, is not the priority region for the UNDP, but I would very much hope that that would change, especially because of the appetite that is going to grow because of this Pacific Forum and the other events that the working group has been organizing in the region. So I very much hope and wish that the UNDP starts focusing on the Pacific Island countries as well. And provide support, especially to countries which we may benefit more from that support. So I think countries like Australia and New Zealand are in a different place, in my view, as compared to countries like Solomon Island or Fiji or PNG, for that matter, or Marshall Islands, right? So I think with that, I'm just wondering now if Ashwin, you're ready with your answers. Are you in a position to answer those 2 questions? And then probably we could also go to the room in Suva if there are any questions from there. And then I will come back to Vanessa with another question. And I think there's a question for you as well, Livio, in the chat box. I will not read it because you can access the chat box. Ashwin, I would like to give you the floor if you're ready with the answers to those 2 questions. And then I will go to the room, Robert, if there are any questions in the room in Suva, any questions for any of the panelists.
Yes, absolutely, Surya. Thank you. I was just frantically looking for a statement that I issued last year, I believe, around the middle of August, about 18th or 19th of August, in relation to the contention over the Public Order Act. And I've obviously said, time and time again, that people have the right to democratic dissent. You should be able to raise issues that are of, concern to you, as long as it doesn't, incite hatred on any of the prohibited grounds of discrimination. Obviously, there's a need to balance that democratic right to dissent, to be able to express yourself with issues of national security and all of that. And given the continuous cul-de-sac that people find themselves in, I had to issue that statement to say that we need to find, creative ways in which people can express the democratic right to dissent, to express themselves, while addressing any concerns that people might have in relation to national security and all of that. And there are various countries, and I drew on relevant examples where people have thought through other creative ways in which they have organized themselves to express dissent within the protocols of deliberative democracy. And I think that that's obviously something that needs to happen. We need to have that conversation in this country around that, because otherwise it's never the twain shall meet. These are like two ships running parallelly, in the middle of the night. So you'd have all of the security implications on the one hand and the human rights conversations on the other. And there's got to be a meeting ground. And so that's what I was calling for in September last year around that. The other thing I wanted to say was that in relation, and still in relation to sort of workers' rights, freedom of expression, association, and assembly, it's important to use the mechanisms available. So the importance of collective bargaining is very important. When things are before courts and tribunals, that needs to be exhausted as well. Obviously there are different models of dissent that people look at. But as far as the institutional mechanisms are concerned, I mean, if things are before court and tribunal, then obviously they need to be respected. Also becomes, sometimes people say that, why is the Human Rights Commission not saying anything about this? If it is before a court, then it becomes sub judice. We are not going to comment on that. But as a matter of principle, the National Human Rights Commission has to operate within the framework of rule of law, and we firmly believe that also people should have the fundamental right to dissent, to express, issues that are of concern to them, and we got to find the middle ground. You got to strike a precarious balance. Obviously, you'd have people with, varying ideological dispositions and political proclivities, and it is their right to profess to whatever values they wish to. Our job is to find that middle ground, to bring these seemingly diabolically opposed but mutually constitutive categories together into that single space, so that something meaningful comes out of it, right? You can't think about this at the expense of, national security or public order, what have you. Neither can you do this at the expense of human rights and the right to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. So the problem so far as I see it is one of preferential framing, and you can't tilt one imperative over another. So that's that. The other question was about the kind of complaints we've received around the environment. No specific, complaint. That's why I was, seeing if the manager could just pull out through the annual reports. You know, large, scale complaint. We've received complaints from a few landowners about, issues around, degradation, residential areas where people are trying to build things, and of course, there's a complaint in terms of the adverse health impact of a particular tower that we're looking at the moment. So those are the kinds of complaints we've received. We've received complaints around pollution, and of course, the construction of new sites and how that's, impacting on people's right to sanitation, housing, so on and so forth.
Thank you. That's very useful. And I would like to underline your point about the middle ground. Because the society is not just Fiji or anywhere else. I mean, if you look around globally, we have very polarized societies with highly contrasting views that people are taking on many issues. And I think reaching that middle ground sometimes become quite critical, as long as that middle ground is in line with the human rights standards. So I think that is the crucial point. So building bridges between different viewpoints is definitely a crucial component for the human rights discourse. So thank you, Ashwin, for that. And I very much hope that the Commission continues to play that active role in strengthening that middle ground. And
Surya,
push.
just sorry to cut you. In terms of the middle ground, one of the other things I wanted to say in the current context, as we're looking at job losses and all of that in relation to COVID-19, I mean, there is this whole imperative to bring businesses back into the conversation as well. I mean, I just keep thinking about the ways in which we constructively engage businesses. And one of the things that I thought about, Surya, in terms of existing legislation and how to use that categoristically is, IDR, alternative dispute resolution as well, because there are ways in which you can bring the business sector back into the conversation and engender an ethos of accountability, and this is not to say that where we need to institute litigation, we do, where it's about monitoring compliance, we do. I mean, I can't name companies right now, but for the manager complaints is sitting right here. In the last couple of months, we've taken on a number of major companies in terms of what's happening with the workers and in terms of the welfare and employment relation issues and all of that. But what we've done, Surya, is also try to constructively engage with the private sector as well, to bring that into the conversation using this middle ground. Last week, we addressed the Human Resources Institute, which has, of course, hundreds of, members. And one of the things that we pushed for was the upholding of the principle of non-discrimination with employers. And we talked about the fact that it's not just, a feel-good thing. There's a legal purchase to the whole thing. There's an ethical and a moral imperative behind it. And we took them through the Constitution and the Employment Relations Act and the Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission Act in terms of the principles of non-discrimination and why that needs to be upheld. And you do come across these instances where they genuinely aren't aware, and there are other times they've actually been playing this game for the longest time because this conversation has never been on the table. So I think it's very, very important to look at the ways in which we can use the existing mechanism to bring businesses back into the conversation as allies. Particularly now when you need employment, you need to generate employment, you need to boost the economy and all of that. On what basis and what are the protocols with which they will enter the human rights narrative? That's the conversation, which is why I think what you're doing today is such an important task. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. And I very much hope that the Commission continues to do this work. And perhaps if time allows, I will come back to you and how could Commission play more proactive role in the NAP process in Fiji. So if time allows, I'll come back to you on that. And I think the issue that you highlighted is quite critical in terms of also the building back better. So I think engaging businesses in a constructive manner is absolutely vital. But of course, we have to engage businesses based on principles. And these are the human rights principles. In the context of BHR, we have the UN guiding principles. All right. So Robert, I'm just wondering if there are any questions in the room. I see there is another question coming from Roshika, and that question I'm going to quickly read. But Robert, I would like to go back to you as well. If there are any questions in the room that anyone would like to ask to any participant.
Yes, we have a question over here. Surya, I'll just bring it over.
Yes, let us take the questions from the room, please, first, because that would make the process more inclusive. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, my concern is due to COVID, people have lost jobs. And I have noticed in quite many cases with employers that the amount of input from the employees are same. But the hours are cut or their pay is also reduced. Is there any way that can be checked into by the Human Resource Department? It's not only few, quite many of them are there. And it's quite a concern to me.
Yes, absolutely. Without incriminating any particular, sort of business sector, we have received numerous complaints. We are dealing with it. We are very actively dealing with it with the Ministry of Labor. We've referred to a number of complaints, and in fact, we've held a number of meetings around that. And we're going organization by organization, complaint after complaint, because we can see that there's a general pattern here in terms of the interdiction of rights and certain benefits and all of that. And one of the larger conversations we're also having is about force majeure and all of that, and whether it's a breach of contract.
Another one is that some of the employers, they afford to pay the FNPF at the rate it was paid earlier.
Yes.
But just because of government's decision, most of us have lost 5%, unfortunately. And that's unfair to us.
Thank you for...
I can't speak for government, except one of the things that I am going to say is that, these are extraordinary times, and we're working within a complexity of constraints, right? I mean, we all understand that. We all understand that, we are in an economic malaise. However, that doesn't change the fact that there are fundamental, right, questions around human rights and human dignity that absolutely needs to be addressed. And without that, there's no building back better, or, sort of the return to this new normalcy or whatever the nomenclature is. And so what we are doing is we are looking at individual complaints and also collective, complaints from individuals and institutions where there has been such a breach and interdiction, to take it up with the relevant agencies so that there can be some kind of remedy, because, this is going to have a chain effect. If people get away with this, then of course there will be others that will feel emboldened to say, look, this is the opportunity to slash because we can, and nobody's going to hold us accountable. So the real issue is about remedy, and how do we get sort of institutional recourse around some of these issues, and have that other larger national conversation, so that we can arrest this situation. Otherwise, it's free for all, and it leads to exploitation. And we're doing that not only with the locals here, but also foreign nationals. Like I said, last week, the cases that we're dealing with involve a number of foreign nationals. Not only have their passports been taken away, but all of these other benefits have been taken away. So how do we restitute those things? And we have a Ministry of Labor, we've got the tribunal and all of that. And so we're making sure that people are able to access these institutions for recourse. It's very, very important.
Thank you, Ashwin. I'm mindful of the time left, and I think I would not like to come in way of your right to food, the lunchtime in Fiji in particular. So I still have about 13, 14 minutes. So I would like to go to Vanessa now. And
Surya, there's a few more questions in the room if you would like me to take some.
All right. So why don't we take all the questions in one go? And if the participants could be brief, that would be useful. And then let us see if we can answer those questions or not. But at least let us hear the questions. Sometimes hearing the questions also is quite critical. So Robert, let us collect all the questions from the room in one go. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here first.
Thank you. just my general questions to all. How important is for any national human rights institutions of any country to be accredited to the Paris Principle? And secondly, what is the level of democracy or human rights to be respected in any country? What is the level that you measured it? Because from my point, my perspective, especially in Fiji, we have seen the trade unions or any civil society has been refused to show protest, uh, even to participate in the trade unions. A lot of our political leaders have been taken just to show when they show their opinion. And that is one of the benchmark that I've seen that human rights in Fiji has not been honored or been respected, or even the actions, the non-actions from our human rights commissions officials. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question. You had a question.
Thank you. I just have a few questions regarding your statement that you mentioned that human rights applied vertically and horizontally. So in terms of public sectors and private sector. So my question is based on environmental impact assessment, which regarding Malolo Island. You mentioned that there's none you said no environmental complaint which was handled by the Human Rights Commissions. So the question is, did the Human Rights Commission Fiji dealt with this issue, or they just leave it in a flow in the platform, despite it being dug by the foreign journalism from Australia? Am I right?
Any further questions, Robert, in the room?
Thank you. I think that's everything, Surya. So
okay.
Over to you.
So may I suggest that some of these questions are very specific about the Fiji's Human Rights Commission, and we're running short of time. So my suggestion, if that is acceptable, is that you may discuss this over the lunch, because you are in the same room, if you don't mind. And if time allows, I would give the floor to Ashwin, but otherwise my suggestion would be that these are important questions, especially the status of NHRIs in terms of the Paris Principles. And I think the working group is writing a report on the role of NHRIs in promoting the business and human rights agenda. That report will be out next year. And from our perspective, it is absolutely vital that the NHRIs are independent. They have the resources and the competence and jurisdiction to push the BHR agenda. With those remarks, I would like to give floor to Vanessa now. Vanessa, if you wish to say anything more about where you would like Australia to go in the next, let us say, 2 to 3 years, not only what the government does for itself, but also as a country which is going to move further the region, what is your vision? I think if you want to share anything on that, or if you also want to chip in to 1 or 2 questions which are in the chat box. One question is that it seems, the question is from Roshika, that there is no systemic monitoring of human rights risk or abuses by businesses in Asia generally. Australia is not part of Asia, but if you have any reflections of that who can monitor those abuses? Are there any experiences on that? And probably Livio, you can also reflect on that question. And I will give you the floor after Vanessa. Vanessa, you have the floor, and if you can be brief, I will appreciate. My apologies, we're running short of time.
Yeah, no worries. I don't want to stand between everyone and lunch either. They're really good questions, and I think from a monitoring perspective, obviously there can be a role there for for a whole different groups of stakeholders. So I think again, national human rights institutions, and this kind of ties into the question before as well about the role of national human rights institutions. I think they can play a very important role there if they're able to hear complaints, and if they can help to monitor not just where they hear complaints, but also to see systemically what issues might be coming up in particular industries, and to look at that. I think, as I mentioned before, in some countries, the national contact points, where they exist, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, can play a really important role there as well in providing a mechanism where people can come to complain. And they can also, because of the types of complaints they hear, can sometimes, I think, also see, okay, to Livio's point before around awareness raising again, if there are particular complaints that are popping up constantly in relation to a particular sector, then maybe those types of mechanisms can play a role there in that kind of ongoing monitoring as well. I think also groups like the Business and Human Rights Resource Centre, and we do have a Pacific representative for the Business and Human Rights Resource Centre in Amy Sinclair, and I think she has other members of her team, where I think, I would encourage you to use that mechanism in terms of sending stories that you might have around particular issues that might be coming up. Just having it kind of to Surya's point before about seeing the questions sometimes just seeing those types of issues coming up in a public setting, even if they're not necessarily a formal grievance mechanism, can be very helpful. In terms of Australia, I think I would like to see movement continuing, on the broader human rights issue. I think modern slavery is a very, very important topic. It's an egregious human rights abuse, but we do know, as we've heard today as well, that there are many other human rights issues that companies can impact, including, to Ashwin's point, there's a whole range of labour exploitation that happens before we get to modern slavery. And so I think it's very important that we start to do more awareness raising here to ensure that we start to move, I think, a little bit beyond the modern slavery discussion. And we have had some suggestions in Australia that perhaps that Modern Slavery Act should morph into mandatory human rights due diligence in the future. So I guess, and my last point is just to see stakeholders continuing to work with each other, because no one stakeholder group can do this alone. It's a bit cliched, but I think it's true. So I'll stop there, Surya. Thanks.
And thank you for also keeping within time. Much appreciated. Livio, I would like to go back to you now, and any questions that you would like to respond to briefly. And after that, Natasha, there's a question from Roshika about human rights defenders, role of civil society, and what could be done about it. So if you want to briefly respond to that question, Natasha. Probably I should read a little bit, because you don't have access to chat, I believe, because you are in person there. So the question of Roshika is that when human rights defenders stand up against the state and corporations and demand accountability for violations linked to corporate activities or state-supported expansion of land-intensive industries, they experience repercussions, rape, death, etc. What work is being done to protect human rights defenders and lobby states to adopt into domestic law the principles of UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders? I can briefly respond to this question by saying that the working group is developing guidance for human rights defenders, what it means for the states and businesses. But Natasha, if you would like to jump in after Livio and respond to that, that would be very useful. Livio, over to you now.
Thank you, Surya. There was a question directed to me. I don't know if all the audiences have seen it in relation to how is business feeling about the national action plans, and what about those businesses that think that NAPs and other policies slow down economic development? Indeed, I mean, this is a point being made by some. Of course, my instinctive reaction to that type of point is what type of economic development we want. Certainly not at the expenses of vulnerable groups. However, let me give a concrete examples also of there is evidence of the contrary, that actually NAPs can help economic development. And the concrete examples is Thailand. You need to know that Thailand, in my view at least, one of the main drivers that made Thailand draft a national action plan is a yellow card that they received from the EU about their fishery sector because of instances of modern slavery. So Thailand needed to change that reputational problem, and companies in the fishing industry had the same problem. The NAP did resolve, at least to an extent, their reputational issue. I'm not saying it resolved completely the modern slavery problem, but it did resolve the issue because EU did withdraw also as a consequence of the NAP, in my view, and certainly the efforts of Thailand to move towards business and human rights, remove the yellow card, reopened the market and allow companies to keep selling fishing products to the EU. So again, there are actually instances that prove that a country positioning itself to offer clean and green supply chains to those trading partners that want that is actually good for business, and of course, on top of being good and most importantly for people. Allow me to give a quick input also to the questions on what are we doing, what are countries doing to protect human rights defenders. Again, signal a practice that hasn't necessarily translated yet into impact, but when it comes to human rights defenders, I want to say that it was identified in Thailand during the national baseline assessment of the NAP. That was one of the main challenge. Thailand, I think, courageously chose human rights defenders as one of the 4 priorities of its NAPs. And it has a quite specific list of actions that will be taking to protect human rights defenders, including anti-SLAPP legislations. Again, remains to be seen how much that will be implemented, but I would definitely encourage considering human rights defenders in focus in NAPs that may be developed also in the Pacific. That's certainly one way to help addressing it. I'll stop here to give space to other panelists. Surya.
Thanks, Livio. We're almost about to finish the session, but before we do that, I would like to give floor once again to Natasha. If you would like to make any concluding observations, Natasha, or you want to react to any of the questions, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Surya and Roshika, for the question on human rights defenders. This afternoon, there's a session I'm presenting on human rights defenders. So I think that will cover a little bit more thoroughly than I will be able to do it now. But definitely, I think one of the issues that remains in the Pacific is human rights defenders themselves not being aware of their rights. So many of the persons we work closely with are very much not aware of how to do the reporting, even to access to justice issue. There's also a lot of fear to reporting. So even things do happen, there is a very strong approach to resolving another means and not really take it up in a legal mechanism. To take it up to a legal mechanism requires funds, requires other processes, requires support from your community, which is usually quite missing. And that is a deterrent to human rights defenders to seek legal mechanism. Firstly, secondly, because they are not aware of, firstly, of it. And I think Roshika is very much aware because she was a chair until lately on Pacific Network on Human Rights Defenders, where I also sit with her and a few other colleagues from OHCHR office. We have started that network, but it's at a teething stage. So it's probably going to mature in 5 years or 10 years time, whether it's going to be able to take into reports and actually start to do some process of assisting these human rights defenders. At University of the South Pacific, we are developing 2 new courses on human rights defenders. So one is going to be offered in semester 1 next year. One is going to be offered in semester 2 next year. The one offered in semester 1 is an introduction to human rights defense. It has a whole unit on business and human rights. So I hope that in 5 years' time, a lot of people who are human rights defenders are going to go through that course, become more aware of their rights, become more assertive about accessing justice, know the process of how to do it, know how the different mechanisms exist and how to approach it, know that there are non-state actors where they can also request for assistance and request to respect their rights and how to go about doing that. So these are all quite a lengthy process as well to explain these things because it will require a lot of awareness and strengthening at the NGO and human rights defender sector within the human rights defenders as well. And again, I think the Pacific culture, at many times, it's a positive thing, but sometimes it gets in the way when we talk about legal actions. So I think there's some of the things that we might have to, sensitive issues that we'll have to negotiate down the road. That's my take on it. Thank you, Surya.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you for highlighting the role of universities in building the capacity of human rights defenders and others. And so I think I would like to conclude the session now. Thank you all the panelists for joining. Thank you all the participants. joining us virtually or in person in Fiji or in the Solomon Island. Very much appreciated. And I think going forward, the working group working with the Office of the High Commissioner and other partners is going to push the agenda in developing a national action plan or finding other pathways to implement UN guiding principles in this part of the region. So hopefully we can work together after this forum to push the agenda. I know there is a question from Christina about the legal waiver and how that legal waiver is consistent with UN guiding principles. Christina, as we have said it before, legal waiver should not be there, especially if a business is putting it as a condition to provide some remediation. I think that is inconsistent with the letter and the spirit of UN guiding principles. We have said it before in 2017 report and elsewhere. So I would like you to refer to those previous communications on that. So with this, thank you very much once again, everyone. And I would close this session. Enjoy your lunch, and let us continue the conversation after the lunch, during this forum, and of course, afterwards. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye for now.